It's collapsing! Run! Hold the baby tight. Hold the baby tight.
The most dangerous man in Chicago stopped breathing because of a waitress. Kang Jun owned the shadows. He commanded syndicates, controlled territories, made men disappear with a single word. His reputation was built on silence and precision, the Ghost King, who never showed his face, never left witnesses, never felt anything. But now, standing in the rain-soaked alley behind the midnight grill, watching through the kitchen window, he couldn't move. The waitress inside was wiping down the steel counters, her movements tired but rhythmic. Nothing unusual except for the silver chain around her neck. Not platinum, not gold. Just a crude tin heart and a fraying cord, the kind of cheap trinket that belonged in a junk drawer. A necklace he had stolen from a pawn shop 15 years ago. A necklace he had given to a girl named Sydney Ortega in the basement of Street Benedict's orphanage, promising her he'd come back when he made something of himself. Kang Jun had made something of himself. He controlled half of Chicago's underworld. His penthouse overlooked the river. His name was feared in 3 languages. His net worth exceeded what most people earned in 10 lifetimes. Yet he hadn't slept through the night in 8 years. Every dawn, he woke in his California king bed, surrounded by silence so absolute it felt like drowning. His doctor prescribed pills. His accountant suggested therapy. His second-in-command suggested he take a vacation. None of them understood. Control, that was what Kang Jun needed. Control over every operation, every shipment, every breath his enemies took. That was why he had personally overseen the Midnight Grill protection detail for the past 3 months. One of the neighborhood gangs had been pushing into his territory, extorting local businesses. He needed to send a message, clean and surgical. The diner was irrelevant, just another struggling establishment in a dying neighborhood. He would handle it personally, remind everyone why ghosts don't negotiate. Then he saw her through the window. Sydney Ortega, 31 years old, night shift waitress, living alone in a studio apartment 6 blocks away. He'd known these facts for exactly 3 months. What he hadn't known, what had stopped his heart the moment he'd seen the surveillance footage, was that she still wore his promise around her neck. For the first 2 weeks, Kang Jun told himself it was coincidence. The world was full of cheap jewelry. Tin hearts were common. But he'd watched the footage again and again, zooming in until he could see the crooked surs he'd carved into the metal with a stolen screwdriver. The sames his 14-year-old hands had struggled to form. The same heart he'd wrapped in newspaper and given her the night before the Kang family came to take him away. Street Benedict's. He hadn't allowed himself to think about that place in 15 years. He'd erased every connection, changed his name from Kang Jun to Kang Jun when the family adopted him into their empire, buried his past under layers of violence and wealth until the orphan boy ceased to exist. But memory is a patient hunter. He remembered the cold dormitory, the smell of industrial soap and fear, the older boys who took food from the younger ones, the nights spent hungry, listening to sirens wail through broken windows. And he remembered Sydney, small for her age, too smart for her own good, with eyes that saw through every lie the adults told them. He'd protected her, not because he was brave, but because protecting her made him feel like he mattered. She would save half her portions for him when he got in trouble. He would stand between her and anyone who tried to hurt her. At night, they would sit by the radiator and dream about escape not together, because neither of them believed in fairy tales, but about a world where they were warm and full and safe. One winter night, Kang Jun had broken into a pawn shop. He was supposed to steal cash for the older boys, payment for their protection. Instead, he'd taken a tarnished silver chain and a tin pendant shaped like a heart. He'd given it to Sydney on Christmas Eve, the only gift either of them received that year. "When I get out of here," he'd said, his voice breaking with adolescent certainty, "I'll come back for you. I'll be somebody. Keep this, so you'll remember." She had smiled, and for one moment, he'd felt like a king. 3 weeks later, the Kang family came. They were powerful, connected to networks that stretched across oceans, that turned poverty into profit and loyalty into currency. They wanted to adopt him, give him their name, train him in their empire. There was one condition: complete severance from the past. No contact with anyone from Street Benedict's. No mention of where he came from. Kang Jun would die. Kang Jun would be born. He'd hesitated for exactly 5 seconds. Then he'd agreed. He told himself he would find a way back to her, that he would keep his promise somehow. But the Kang family was thorough. They moved him to a compound outside the city, trained him in languages and ledgers and the grammar of violence. And slowly, deliberately, Kang Jun drowned beneath the weight of Kang Jun's becoming. By the time he was 21, he'd earned his reputation. By 25, he'd taken control of the Chicago operations. By 30, he was the Ghost King, the man who ruled from the shadows, who never showed mercy, who had buried his past so deep that even he believed it was gone. But now, staring at the tin heart through a kitchen window, Kang Jun realized the past had never left. It had been waiting for him, worn around the neck of a woman who still believed in the promises of orphan boys. He could walk through that door right now, tell her who he was, reclaim the promise he'd made 15 years ago. But that would mean admitting what he'd become. That would mean facing the boy he'd killed to build his empire. Kang Jun had orchestrated hostile takeovers. He'd stared down rival bosses and watched them break. He'd ordered executions without flinching. But he could not bring himself to face one waitress wearing a tin heart. So he made a different choice. He would watch her, test her, leave traces of their shared past and see if she recognized them. He would gather evidence, build certainty, protect himself from the vulnerability of hope. It wasn't courage. Kang Jun knew that. It was the same cowardice that had made him sign the Kang family papers without saying goodbye. But it was all he could manage. The first test came 2 nights later. Kang Jun left a small wooden box on the diner's back step, the kind Street Benedicts used to store donated toys. Inside, a single item, a blue marble with a crack running through its center. He watched from across the street as Sydney found it during her smoke break. She didn't smoke anymore, he'd noticed. Just stood in the alley, breathing the cold air like it was medicine. Her hand trembled when she opened the box. Not fear, recognition. That marble had been hers. She'd won it from an older boy who'd tried to steal Kang Jun's blanket. She'd challenged him to a game, cheated brilliantly, and given Kang Jun the prize. "Knights need tokens," she'd said, pressing it into his palm. "So they remember what they're fighting for." Now, 15 years later, she held it up to the streetlight. The crack caught the glow, splitting it into fractured colors across her brown skin. She didn't cry, didn't smile, just closed her fingers around it and slipped it into her apron pocket. Then she looked directly at the shadows where Kang Jun stood. He stopped breathing. Impossible. He was trained in surveillance, in becoming invisible. Yet her dark eyes found him through the darkness, like she'd always known he was there. She turned and walked back inside. Kang Jun's hands shook. She'd seen him, or she'd wanted him to know she knew someone was watching. Either way, the game had shifted. He returned to his penthouse and poured whiskey he didn't drink. The Ghost King didn't shake, didn't second guess, didn't feel the floor tilt beneath him because a waitress had glanced at shadows. But Kang Jun, the boy who'd bled for a tin heart, was drowning him from the inside out. Kang Jun started haunting the midnight grill like a ghost, learning to be human again. He never sat in Sydney's section. Too obvious. Instead, he took the corner booth with the broken vinyl, ordered black coffee, and watched her work. She moved through the diner like water fluid, essential, unnoticed by everyone except him. She had changed. The girl who'd smiled at stolen marbles now carried herself with a survivor's wariness. Her uniform was clean but worn, Her hair pulled back in a style that said function over beauty, though beauty found her anyway. High cheekbones, full lips pressed thin from years of biting back words, skin like polished mahogany under the fluorescent lights. But her eyes, those hadn't changed, still sharp, still seeing everything. On his fifth visit, Kang Jun noticed the manager yelling at her over a spilled order. Sydney stood perfectly still, absorbing the abuse without flinching, the same way she'd stood when the orphanage matron had screamed. That night, the manager's car was found stripped in an alley, a warning from the Ghost King's network, though the manager would never know who'd sent it. On the seventh visit, Kang Jun overheard two men in the next booth discussing protection fees for local businesses. His own syndicate's work, the neighborhood operations he'd authorized without ever visiting the streets. He'd been accidentally bleeding the woman he'd sworn to protect. The realization hit him like a blade between ribs. He left cash on the table and walked out into the rain, his driver trailing confused behind him. That night, Kang Jun rerouted every protection operation within 5 blocks of the Midnight Grill. The losses would cost him territory. His second-in-command questioned the decision. Not negotiable, Kang Jun said, and the conversation ended. Sydney broke the silence first. It happened on a Tuesday morning, during the dead zone between breakfast and lunch. Kang Jun sat in his usual booth, pretending to read a newspaper. She approached with the coffee pot, her steps deliberate. "You take it black," she said, pouring without asking. "No sugar, no cream. Same way you drank the instant coffee Mrs. Park used to sneak us." Kang Jun's hand froze halfway to the cup. Mrs. Park, the night custodian at Street Benedict's who'd let them warm up in her supply closet during winter. He looked up. Sydney met his gaze without fear, without expectation. Just cold assessment. "How long have you known?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "Since the first time you walked through that door." She refilled the salt shaker at his table, her movements casual. "You changed your face with money. Got rid of the scar over your eye, fixed your broken nose. But you still tilt your head the same way when you're thinking. Still tap your finger twice before you pick up a cup." Kang Jun felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with his identity. "Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you?" Sydney's smile held no warmth. "We both have our reasons for staying quiet, don't we, Kang Jun?" The name hit him like a bullet. No one had called him that in 15 years. "It's Kang Jun now. I know what they call you." She set down the coffee pot, leaning close enough that he caught her scent vanilla and fryer grease, and something underneath that was purely her. The Ghost King. The shadow that bleeds Chicago dry. "I know exactly who you are, and yet you're still here. And yet you keep coming back." Her dark eyes held his, unflinching. "Funny how that works." She walked away before he could respond, leaving him with cooling coffee and the growing certainty that he'd underestimated her completely. That night, Kang Jun pulled her file. Not the surface information his men had gathered, but the deep dive. What he found made his blood run cold. Sydney Ortega wasn't just a waitress. For the past 3 years, she'd been feeding information to community organizers trying to push gangs out of her neighborhood. Locations of drug houses, protection racket schedules, names of dirty cops. She'd been unknowingly sabotaging his operations while wearing his promise around her neck. Kang Jun decided to end the game with one final test. He waited until the diner closed, until Sydney was alone in the kitchen doing prep work for the morning shift. Then he walked through the back door like he owned it. Because technically, through 3 shell companies, he did. She didn't startle. Just looked up from the onions she was dicing, knife steady in her scarred hands. "Locked doors don't stop ghosts," she said. "Neither do locked hearts." He pulled a photograph from his jacket and placed it on the steel counter between them. But I needed to be sure. The photograph showed Street Benedict's on Christmas Eve, 15 years ago. A few children gathered around a donated tree. In the back corner, partially hidden by shadows, a teenage boy handed a small wrapped package to a girl who looked at him like he'd hung the stars. Sydney stared at the photo for a long moment. Then she picked up her knife and stabbed it through the image, pinning it to the cutting board. "That boy made a promise," she said, her voice quiet and deadly. "Then he got adopted by a crime family and forgot the girl who kept his secrets." She twisted the knife. "So yes, I remember. And yes, I kept your cheap tin heart. Want to know why?" Kang Jun couldn't speak. "Because it reminded me that promises are just pretty words men tell you before they disappear." She pulled the knife free, went back to her onions. "Now, are you here to kill me for the intel I've been leaking, or are we done playing pretend?" The question hung between them like a blade. Kang Jun had eliminated people for far less than industrial sabotage. His reputation demanded it. His position required it. But looking at Sydney, her shoulders tense, her jaw set, her hands steady despite the danger, he saw the truth. She hadn't been fighting him. She'd been fighting the world that had chewed them both up and spit them into different hells. "I'm not here to kill you," he said. "Then why are you here?" "Because I never forgot." The admission cost him everything. "Because every morning, I wake up in a penthouse built on blood money and wonder if you're warm, if you're safe, if you hate me." Sydney's knife stopped moving. "I don't hate you, Kang Jun." "Kang Jun." "No." She finally looked at him, and her eyes held something more dangerous than anger-pity. "The Ghost King I can't touch." "But Kang Jun, that stupid boy who stole jewelry for me?" Her smile was broken glass. "Him, I could have loved." She left the kitchen without another word, leaving him standing in the fluorescent lights with a photograph stabbed through the heart. Kang Jun's second in command was a man named Victor Reyes, efficient, ruthless, loyal for 12 years. Which was why the betrayal cut so deep. It started with a pattern Kang Jun noticed in the protection reports. Routes changed. Schedules shifted. Always in ways that kept operations away from the Midnight Grill's neighborhood, exactly as he'd ordered. But the modifications were too precise, too calculated. Someone was tracking his obsession. He had his tech specialist run shadow surveillance on his own inner circle. What they found was a digital trail of deleted texts, encrypted calls, meetings held in dead zones where even the Ghost King's reach couldn't penetrate. Victor was selling information, not to rivals, but to a smaller gang trying to expand into Kang Jun's territory, the same gang that had been targeting Sydney's neighborhood. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Victor had identified Sydney as Kang Jun's weakness, leaked her location and schedule to the rival gang, then waited. If Kang Jun moved to protect her, he'd be exposed as sentimental, weak. His empire would fracture. If he didn't move, she'd die, and the guilt would destroy him from the inside. Either way, Victor positioned himself to take control. Kang Jun discovered the betrayal on a Thursday evening. By Friday dawn, he'd made his decision. He called Victor to his office, a converted warehouse overlooking the river. The space was deliberately cold, concrete floors, exposed pipes, the kind of place where sound carried and blood cleaned easily. "You wanted to see me, boss?" Victor's confidence was unshakable. He had no idea the trap had already closed. "I have a question," Kang Jun said, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. "When you sold me out, did you factor in that I've known for 6 days?" Victor's face went carefully blank. "I don't know what." "The Ortega woman." Kang Jun cut him off, his voice flat. "You think she's my weakness? You're right, but you made a mistake." "What mistake?" "Thinking I'd choose the Empire over her." Kang Jun set down his glass. "I spent 15 years building this kingdom on the belief that power mattered more than people. You taught me well." Victor's hand moved toward his concealed weapon. "But here's what you didn't understand," Kang Jun continued, his tone conversational. "The Ghost King would have let her die to protect his reputation. But I'm not the Ghost King anymore. I'm just Kang Jun, and I'm done pretending. The warehouse doors opened. 8 of Kang Jun's most loyal enforcers entered, weapons drawn. Victor finally showed fear. You can't do this. The council won't. The council answers to money. I have money. Kang Jun pulled out his phone, showed Victor the screen. Bank transfers, recordings, evidence of every piece of Victor's betrayal sent to every major player in the organization. What I don't have anymore is patience for men who threaten what's mine. She's a waitress. She's nothing. The gunshot was precise. Victor collapsed, clutching his knee, screaming. She's everything. Kang Jun corrected quietly. And you just made her a target. He left Victor alive. Barely. A message to anyone else considering betrayal. Then he walked out into the dawn, knowing the war had finally begun. Kang Jun found Sydney in the one place he knew she'd be, the rooftop of her apartment building, watching the sunrise. She didn't turn when his footsteps approached, just stood at the railing, the tin heart catching the early light. Your man sold me out, she said. I know. The Santiago gang is coming for me. I know. And you're here because... She finally looked at him. Her eyes held no fear, only exhaustion. To put me in a safe house? Buy me off? Make me disappear? I'm here because I'm tired of running. Kang Jun stopped beside her, close enough to feel her warmth. 15 years I've been running from you. From what I felt, from who I was. I'm done. Sydney laughed, bitter and beautiful. You're done? That's convenient. Now that your empire's cracking and your enemies know about me, now you want to stop running? Yes. What if I don't want to be saved by the Ghost King? Then don't. He turned to face her fully, but let Kang Jun try. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. I have a penthouse, he said quietly. High security, armed guards, everything you'd need to stay safe until I end this. I don't want your penthouse. Then what do you want? Sydney's hand moved to the tin heart, her fingers tracing its crooked edges. I want the truth. Did you mean it? That night in the orphanage, when you promised to come back, did you mean it, or was I just another convenient lie? The question cut deeper than any betrayal. I meant it, Kang Jun said, his voice raw. I meant it so much that when the Kang family made me choose, I picked the Empire because I was terrified. Terrified that if I stayed Kang Jun, I'd always be that scared, powerless kid who couldn't protect you from anything that mattered. So you became powerful enough to protect me, and cruel enough to forget me. I never forgot. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her jaw, tilting her face toward his. Every deal I closed, every territory I claimed, I told myself I was building something worthy of you. But I was just building a tomb. Sydney's breath hitched. You don't get to touch me and expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything, he whispered, his thumb tracing her lower lip. But I'm asking anyway. She closed the distance between them. The kiss was not gentle. It was 15 years of anger and longing compressed into a moment of reckless heat. Her hands fisted in his suit jacket, pulling him closer even as she bit his lip hard enough to draw blood. He tasted copper and fury and something desperately close to salvation. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Sydney's eyes were blazing. One night, she said. You have one night to convince me you're worth the risk. Then I decide if I stay or disappear so deep, even the Ghost King won't find me. Kang Jun pulled her back in. Then I'd better make it count. The attack came at 2 a.m., during the witching hour when even predators sleep. Kang Jun woke to his phone vibrating 3 short bursts, the emergency signal. His security chief's voice was clipped. The Midnight Grill. They're burning it. He was moving before the call ended. Sydney jolting awake beside him. What? They found you. He was already pulling on clothes, weapons appearing from hidden compartments. Stay here. My men will. That's my workplace. Sydney was out of bed, dressed in seconds. My friends work those shifts. Sydney, you don't get to protect me by locking me away. Her voice cut through his panic. Either we go together or I go alone. The drive took 8 minutes. They could see the smoke from 6 blocks away. The midnight grill was an inferno. Flames poured from shattered windows, black smoke billowing into the pre-dawn sky. Fire trucks screamed in the distance, too far, too late. Kang Jun's driver pulled up to the barricade. Police were already establishing a perimeter, but they parted when they saw him. The Ghost King's reach extended into every corner of Chicago's infrastructure. How many inside? Kang Jun demanded. 3 confirmed, his security chief reported, falling into step. Night manager, cook, and 1 server. The Santiago gang locked the exits before they lit it. Sydney was running before anyone could stop her. Kang Jun caught her at the door, spinning her back. You can't. Maria's in there. Sydney's voice cracked. She's pregnant. She covered my shift last week when I was sick. He saw his own helplessness reflected in her eyes. The same helplessness he'd felt as a child, watching the world hurt people he couldn't save. Then we go together, he said. They went through the back entrance, the one Kang Jun had used for his midnight visits. The heat was immediate, suffocating. Smoke turned the air into soup, every breath a knife to the lungs. Maria! Sydney's scream cut through the roar of flames. A weak cry answered from the kitchen. They found her in the walk-in freezer, the only place the fire hadn't reached yet. Maria was crouched in the corner, her arms wrapped around the cook and manager, all 3 coughing violently. Get them out, Kang Jun ordered his men, who'd followed them in. I'll clear the rest. There's no one else, Sydney started. Then they heard it. A child's cry from the office upstairs. Maria's daughter, the manager gasped. She was sleeping in the break room. Kang Jun was already moving. The stairs were engulfed, structural integrity failing. He kicked through the wall instead, using brute force to create a new path. Sydney stayed on his heels. You're insane. And you're a hypocrite. He pulled her through the gap. Didn't you just say we go together? They found the girl, maybe 6 years old, huddled under a desk, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Kang Jun scooped her up, shielding her from the heat. The return trip was worse. The ceiling gave way in sections, raining burning debris. Kang Jun's suit caught fire. He didn't slow down. They burst into the alley as the building's second floor collapsed behind them. Paramedics swarmed immediately, taking the girl, checking vitals, shouting medical jargon. Kang Jun's security chief approached, his expression grim. Boss, we caught 2 of the Santiago soldiers trying to flee. What do you want us to? Kill them, Kang Jun said flatly. But make it hurt first. Sydney grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. No, he turned, incredulous. They tried to murder you. And you'll kill them. And Santiago will retaliate. And more people die. She stepped closer, her soot-covered face inches from his. I didn't pull you out of that fire so you could go back to being the Ghost King. Then what do you want me to be? Better, she said simply. Be better than them. Be the boy who bled for a tin heart instead of the man who drowns the world in blood. Around them, his men waited for orders. The city held its breath. Kang Jun looked at the burning building, at the survivors being loaded into ambulances, at Sydney's hand still gripping his arm like an anchor. Let them go, he said finally, but deliver a message to Santiago. Tell him the Midnight Grill is under my protection now. Anyone who touches it, touches me. His security chief hesitated. That's a declaration of war, boss. Then war it is. Kang Jun pulled Sydney closer. But we fight it my way now. The war lasted 3 weeks. It was brutal, efficient, and surprisingly bloodless. Kang Jun didn't kill Santiago's men. He bought them, offered better pay, better protection, better futures. The ones who refused, he froze out, cutting their supply lines, their money streams, their connections until they had nothing left but surrender. Santiago himself tried to flee to Mexico. Kang Jun had him detained at the airport, not by violence, but by a suddenly discovered warrant for tax evasion. The FBI would handle him now. The Ghost King had learned to weaponize the system instead of just bleeding it. When the dust settled, Kang Jun owned more of Chicago than before. But he'd changed the rules. Protection rackets became security services with actual protection. Drug operations got funneled into addiction treatment programs. The empire remained, but its edges had dulled. Sydney watched it all, from the penthouse she'd finally agreed to occupy. Not as a prisoner, but as an equal. On a cold February evening, exactly 16 years after he'd given her a tin heart, Kang Jun found her on the balcony again. "The Midnight Grill reopens tomorrow," he said, joining her at the railing. "Full renovations, new equipment. I made sure Maria got the manager position. You're trying to buy forgiveness. I'm trying to build something that doesn't require it." He pulled a small box from his pocket. "I have something for you." Sydney's expression was wary. "If that's a diamond, it's not." He opened the box. Inside was a locket gold, delicate, expertly crafted. But when Sydney opened it, she found the original tin heart nestled inside, its crooked still visible. "I can't undo the past," Kang Jun said quietly. "Can't give you back the 15 years I stole. But I can promise you this. I'm done running, done hiding, done being the ghost." He took her hand. "I'm just Kang Jun now, the boy who loved you before the world taught us that love was weakness." Sydney's fingers closed around the locket. "And what if I'm not the same girl? What if I'm too broken to love the boy back? Then we'll be broken together." He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I don't need you fixed, Sydney. I just need you here." She kissed him then, not with the desperate fury of their first kiss, but with something slower, deeper. A kiss that tasted like second chances and hard-won trust. When they broke apart, Sydney smiled. A real smile this time, the kind that reached her eyes. "You're still a criminal," she said, "and you're still sabotaging my operations through community organizing. I'm more effective now that I have inside information." "I know." Kang Jun laughed, the sound foreign and wonderful. "That's why I transferred 30% of my legitimate assets into your name. If you're going to dismantle my empire, you might as well profit from it." Sydney stared. "You're insane." "No, I'm in love." He clasped the locket around her neck, the gold chain settling beside the tin heart she'd never removed. "And for once, I'm not afraid to admit it." They stood together on the balcony, overlooking a city that feared his name and loved her stubborn kindness. The Ghost King and the waitress who'd tamed him. The orphans who'd survived by becoming what the world demanded, then chose to become something better. Below them, Chicago glittered like broken glass catching light, beautiful and dangerous, and theirs. "I have one condition," Sydney said. "Name it. You teach me everything. The business, the networks, the power structures." Her dark eyes held his. "If I'm going to stand beside you, I stand as an equal. Not a queen to your king, but a partner." Kang Jun smiled, fierce and proud. "Deal." The tin heart and the gold locket rested together against her skin, the promise that was broken and the promise that would be kept. Not because either of them had become perfect, but because they'd finally stopped running from the people they used to be. And somewhere in the darkness, the boy from Street Benedict's and the girl who'd kept his secrets finally found their way home.